Hola. Hola, hola. Buenos días. Good morning. We will start the plenary talk of Professor Nagurney. It's a pleasure for me sharing this session. The title of the section of the talk will be Human Migration Networks, How Operations Research Can Assist with Refugees and Supply Chain Labor Shortage. Before starting the presentation of Professor Nagurney, let me say some words about IFORS and also some words about the career of Anna. As you probably know, IFORS is the International Federation of Operational Research Societies. It's our global OR community. Well, the reason why I am here is because I am the IFORS Regional Vice President representing ALIO in the Executive Committee of IFORS. Some information about IFORS. These are the main aims of the Federation: promote the development of operational research worldwide, both in methodology and practice, and also link the members of the different societies and regional groupings like ALIO. As you know, the IFORS includes several regional groupings. One of them is ALIO, and we have Euro, NORAM, and APOS. The federation was founded in 1959 by the three founding members, UK, USA, and France. After 50 years, it has over 50 national societies, including more than 30,000 individual members. So it's a very large academic community. Some activities carried out by the Federation in order to attain the goals. Well, there are the conference, the IFORS CLAIO conference. As you know, the next CLAIO conference will be held in Santiago. Yesterday, Jorge Vera gave some useful information about the conference. Well, IFORS has the distinguished lectures, as is the case of Anna. The global webinar series, which is, there are several webinars each year with free access. Well, the journals, I will comment some information about the journals in the next slide. The channels of communications are mainly the website and the newsletter of IFORS. Also, IFORS provides support, financial support, particularly for summer and winter schools and for new OR societies. Well, this is information of the conference. Was already presented by Jorge yesterday. The next IFORS conference will be held in Santiago next year from 10 to 14 in July. Here we have the co-chair of the local organizing committee, Professor Rafael Epstein and Professor Jorge Vera. And the chair of the programming committee is Professor Alice Smith.
Thank you.
Some information about the publications of IFORS, the flagship journal, International Transactions in Operations Research. The editor-in-chief is Professor Celso Ribeiro from Brazil. And there is a relatively new journal, which is called Sustainability Analytics and Modeling. The editor-in-chief is Professor Elise Miller-Hooks from the George University, USA. And we also have a newsletter where I am the editor or coordinating editor, which is published online. Okay?
So,
Well, this is a partial list of the past distinguished lecturers in different conferences. They gave talks in the IFORS conferences, also regional conferences like CLAIO, IFORS, IFORS, and also in the Euro conference. Then finally, the presentation of Anna.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Professor Anna Nagurney comes from the University of Massachusetts, USA. Some information about her career. Dr. Nagurney is the director of the Big Virtual Center for Super Networks. Her research interests include transportation networks and congestion management, supply chain networks and disruption management, financial networks intermediation, electric power generation and distribution networks, super networks, network economics, energy, sustainability, and environmental policies. So a lot of topics studied by Anna. She has authored or co-authored 12 books, more than 220 reviewed journal articles, and over 50 book chapters. And finally, she is on the editorial board of many journals, including Anna's Population Research, Journal of Economic Dynamics and Control, Computational Economics, and so on. There's a lot, really a lot of journals that Anna is okay, so from my part, this is one.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good, it works now. Okay. Gracias. Muchas gracias. Can you hear me fine? Okay.
Maybe closer.
Maybe a little closer? Better? Okay, okay. It is such an honor to be speaking with you today. Mucho gusto. Es maravilloso estar con ustedes in Buenos Aires. Okay. This is going to be a talk on research that I've been doing for quite a while, but it became even more important, I believe, during the COVID pandemic. It's just terrific to be with all of you in person in this wonderful city on a historic day because of World Cup, right? So I would like to thank, obviously, IFORS and the organizers of this conference. I have made new friends from many different countries and even met a friend from Los Estados Unidos, which I thought was amazing. And the venue is fantastic, so congratulations. This infinity building is exceptional. I've gotten lost here a couple of times. Now, I'm so grateful to our operations research community that has blessed me with many collaborators and fantastic students. You know, students are our future, and it's so nice to see, you know, all these people here from many different ages. So I am Ukrainian. I am the daughter of World War II refugees from Ukraine. I was born in Canada. Some of my relatives actually were refugees in Argentina. And my sister-in-law was born in Argentina, so I feel at home here. I come back, and even the local baristas thought that I was local, which amazed me. So I'd like to dedicate this presentation to essential workers, to all the healthcare workers, teachers, freight service providers, food workers that sustained us during the pandemic. And also I'd like to dedicate it to all those fighting for their freedom, including those fighting for their freedom in Ukraine. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'm not sure I'll be able to get through all of it. In any event, I will be posting it on the Virtual Center for Super Networks website. My goal is first to give you some motivation, and then to talk a little bit about the methodology that we've been using for many of our network problems. I will then go deeper into two applications. The first one has to do with refugee networks and different kinds of policies. And the second one has to do with integrating human migration networks with labor in supply chain networks to try and alleviate labor shortages, which is a big phenomenon in many countries around the world now. And I'll summarize and conclude. You can see I absolutely love networks. I'm totally obsessed with networks. My first kind of research had to deal with congested urban transportation networks, so I'm enjoying, the different modes of transportation in Buenos Aires. I think if you can handle congested urban transportation networks, because they're so complex, so large scale, that typically a lot of the other problems become much simpler and almost like special cases. So in addition, we've been doing a lot of work in supply chain networks, social networks, and even a few years ago, we had a huge National Science Foundation grant. We were one of only 5 teams in the US to try and envision another kind of internet. That was part of the future internet architecture kind of project. So you can see the different kinds of applications. And also, I've been doing a lot of work in financial networks and also social networks, integrating social networks with supply chains and social networks with financial networks. So these are just some of the applications of supply chains, and I've enjoyed the talks on these related subjects at this great conference. And I think students really appreciate applications of supply chains because each kind of product is kind of different. We deal with perishable food supply chains, right? With high technology, we deal with energy supply chains, and they all have specific features. And what our group, I think, is really good at doing is essentially modeling the behavior of different stakeholders in network systems and seeing what kind of flows you'll get, what kind of prices, what will be the costs. And we also do a lot of work on environmental networks as well and sustainability, as well as in disaster relief. I teach a course on humanitarian logistics and healthcare, which is one of my favorite courses to teach because I bring in expert practitioners from around the world, and it's amazing, okay? Even the students say it's a transformative kind of course. So one of the biggest compliments I think I get is when faculty from different countries will email me and say, "Oh, Anna, I got one of your books," and the students took it, okay? And in fact, one of my books, Fragile Networks, which I have right there in the middle, within hours, it was published by Wiley, it was copied and posted on multiple websites around the world, okay? That I didn't like. My co-author didn't like that either. So what I've been emphasizing, I think, throughout the pandemic, and we see it here too, is that really it's all about people, okay? Where would we be without people? And kind of supporting each other and helping each other. And this is something that I've been writing about. And this also work is very relevant to the kinds of crises that we have now in Ukraine. I serve as one of the 4 co-chairs of the board of directors of the CLAIO School of Economics. Every day I get messages. What is happening to my colleagues? What is happening to my students? What kind of strategies should we do? We're now building bomb shelters for schools throughout Ukraine because without bomb shelters, schools cannot open. So we need to be so grateful for the freedom that we have here. Electric power, we have water, and most of all, we have peace. So human migration and refugees, okay? The topic of human migration is something that, it has been going on for centuries. Sometimes you have push phenomena. Okay, the situation might be very bad in a country. There might be, poverty. There might be conflict. There might be strife and so on. Or you can also have pull phenomena, okay? People might want to migrate to areas where there are, enhanced benefits for their families and so forth. There might be less stress, greater economic opportunities, and so on. And the global estimate now is amazing. There were around 281 million international migrants, okay, in 2020. And even yesterday, I turned on the news, Argentinian CNN, and they were talking about, again, tens of thousands of migrants from Mexico coming into Texas. Okay, so this is the United Nations has produced, I thought, this really nice graphic to illustrate the total number of international migrants in the different countries. And you can see we even have them obviously in South America and Latin America, and look at the US and also look at Europe, okay? It's huge. And we see in different parts of the world where you have the majority of migrants. So you see, for example, in Asia, in Europe, Northern Africa, Africa, Northern America, and so on. And it's growing. So what we care about, we look at refugees, and there's a special, definition of refugees, and that's something that's really important. It's someone living outside of his or her country of nationality who is unable or unwilling to return, okay, for a well-substantiated fear of persecution, okay, for various reasons. It could be religion, nationality, membership in a political group, and so on. So we also consider humans adversely affected by climate change as refugees, because you see that's happening even in parts of South America. They're dealing with a drought, and so on. So now, refugees have always been part of human migration. And what I found also amazing is that during the COVID pandemic, the World Health Organization obviously declared it. I don't think we'll ever forget that day, March 11th. And COVID actually exacerbated refugee flows and increased the difficulty of getting asylum in various countries. And when I looked at this, for example, this graphic from the National Geographic, you can see that refugees choose different routes, okay? And this is something, when you think about transportation, you choose different routes, right? To get to your point of work or to get home to your destination after you work. And so a lot of these routes, they could consist of different links, okay? And you might be transiting through different countries, you might be on land, you might be on water. And some of the links actually could be very, very dangerous, okay? So we need to capture, the costs associated with migration, okay? So that's what we do in our modeling. And just look at this, what's happening. You're all aware of the Venezuelan crisis. More than 7 million Venezuelans have left their homeland since 2015. And that's about the number of Ukrainians that have left also since the major invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. So you see, these are some examples, okay? You see the numbers, and about half of the refugees are children, because men between the ages of 18 and 60 are not supposed to leave Ukraine, okay, because they might get conscripted. My friends and colleagues there, a lot of them are academics. Obviously, they're allowed to teach because it's really important to preserve higher education in Ukraine. Okay, and we have all sorts of programs that we've started at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, even supporting virtual scholars. And we had our first event on November 30th, and my colleagues at the Kiev School of Economics, they were all in a bomb shelter, bundled up, because it's like winter there, it was freezing, and they all showed up. And the technology worked. It's one of the hardest things I've ever organized, but they are so grateful. They're so appreciative. And here we have some of the countries that are welcoming Ukrainians. Also, we have US, and I know in South America, Brazil, Argentina as well. So you see these, graphic kind of images of people fleeing, okay? I know this is a day we want to celebrate the World Cup, but I think, one of the themes of this conference is how operations research can help others. And I think we have the powerful tools, and I also think, I'm seeing quite a few of the presentations, that here we are actually influencing policies, government policies, okay, because of our work. Okay, and I think that's very, very powerful. And I think our expertise has never been more needed than now to solve many of the societal and economic problems. And you see some of these examples. I mean, we had in 2015, that was a huge year, all sorts of migratory flows, for example, from Africa. Many were on boats. We had, 137,000 refugees crossing the Mediterranean Sea. and 800 died, okay, in the largest refugee shipwreck. I have friends in Italy that were doing the processing, okay, of some of these refugees, and it's really, really tough, hard. And also, the Afghan war, when we have a refugee crisis also in the US of Afghans, okay, and that was not handled that well, okay, and also the expatriation was very, very challenging with a lot of children, getting hurt and so on. So governments of various nations have been struggling with this, okay? What kind of immigration policy should we have? What kind of refugee policy should we have? Should we be collaborating more? Should we be coordinating more? So there are policies sometimes in origin countries, right? And there are policies sometimes in destination countries. So now we're even working with a team in Italy to try and figure out, could some countries be collaborating better? Could they be forming coalitions to help in terms of refugees? So look at this. We've had nearly 105,000 movement restrictions, okay, since the declaration of the pandemic, implemented around the world. 105,000, trying to figure out, how can we restrict movements and so on, okay, and that's tough. And we can expect these issues will continue with climate change, so it's very important to be addressing them. So we have a model, and I'll be showing you at a high level, but the methodology that we use for a lot of our work is the theory of variational equalities, finite dimensional variational equality theory, sometimes even infinite dimensional variational equality theory. And it's a very elegant formalism. We want to determine a vector x star, okay, that satisfies this inner product for all possible feasible x, and the feasible set x has to be closed and convex, okay? Now, typically the function f that enters the variational equality problem has to be continuous, and it captures information. For example, in terms of congested urban transportation networks, the function f would typically be the vector of costs associated with the paths from different origin nodes to destination nodes. If we're talking about, say, profit maximizing supply chains, we would have minus the gradient of the various profit functions or utility functions of the different players, in the supply chain network, and so on. So, and we all know about constraints, right? I think operations researchers are fantastic in dealing with constraints, whether they're non-negativity constraints, time constraints, budget constraints, and so on, production constraints, and so on. So it's also very powerful mathematical programming formalism because it contains special cases, many of the problems that we're passionate about, right? Optimization problems, we have systems of equations, complementarity problems, it's related to fixed point problems, and also we do a lot of work in game theory, from Nash equilibria to also generalized Nash equilibria. So here you have, for example, a geometric representation of variational equality problem. You want to figure out that x star, where you have the inner product, creates an angle less than or equal to 90 degrees. But what we're also very interested in is figuring out the dynamics before, say, an equilibrium state is reached, or an optimal, like how do travelers adjust their behavior in identifying the optimal routes? How do, say, supply chain firms maximize their profits? How do they decide, over time, the various production outputs or even the types of prices and so on? So for that, we work on what are known as projected dynamical systems. That's a dynamical system theory that we developed with Professor Paul Dupuy, and one of my former students, Ding Zhang, and I wrote a book on it. Amazingly, in applied mathematics, typically it's, a dynamical system is x dot equals minus f of x, x0, some initial state. Okay, they weren't dealing with constraints. Okay, I thought they would know how to handle constraints. So the projected dynamical system guarantees that the constraints are always satisfied. You project back into the feasible set and so on. And I always think, I just love our field of operations research. And I think we tackle such important problems, challenging problems, and if we don't have the methodology to solve it, we'll figure out the methodology, and then other disciplines can take advantage, right? Linear programming, nonlinear programming, and so on. So we're thrilled that our theory of projected dynamical systems has been used in economics, evolutionary games. We've used it even in natural kinds of applications, ecological predator-prey, neuroscience, in all sorts of engineering, and also future internet architectures. So what about the migration model? Okay, this is the paper, and it's co-authored with Professor Patrizia Daniele of the University of Catania in Italy, and another Nagurney, it's my spouse, Vladimir S. Nagurney. So let me give you a little bit of background, because now I'm seeing more interest in these kinds of problems. I actually published the first paper on human migration networks in an economics journal. This is something that I like to do. Sometimes, some physicists think they've, discovered networks. Sorry, we've been working on networks, for quite a long time. So I think, sometimes we do need to publish our work in different disciplinary journals, okay? And I think that's really important. So I've been doing that. And we've had, for example, different kinds of methodologies. Even we've used Markov chains to model, for example, chain migration, which I think is really important, and establish even relationships between various inequalities and Markov chains and stability, okay, if people keep on moving, and so on. But one of the things that I think we're really known for is that we include costs associated with migration. And there could be economic costs, obviously psychological costs. Okay? It's really hard to leave, where you have your family, your community, and so forth, your support system. And amazingly, there was even a book published by a friend of mine in Paris, Professor Christian Moulin, who's a top ecologist, okay, using our kind of migration models. And these are actually some of the other kinds of applications. So, oops. Okay. Another paper which we published in EJOR was the first one to actually introduce regulations. Okay, so I'll be highlighting that. Okay, and also, that's okay. ITOR, which has been mentioned, right? International Transactions and Operational Research. This is the IFORS journal. We've had several papers published there. For example, what if you had a system optimum? Okay, what if you can allocate people of different classes in different countries? Okay, so you have kind of a global optimum there, but people still want to move kind of selfishly. So we have formula analogous to tolls and transportation, how to subsidize, for example, to make the user-optimized solution also system-optimized, I think, and that actually makes a lot of sense. So I'll show you the model. I'll give you some numerical examples, okay, and the kind of results. So we consider a sample refugee network topology. You have different origin nodes representing countries, different destination nodes, and you have different routes, okay? And routes consist of links which could involve different modes of transportation. Now here, we are going to be interested in figuring out path flows, XRK, of different classes, path flows as well as link flows. We're going to assume that we have an initial fixed population at origin node I, okay, of different classes. Also, we're going to have utilities associated with how attractive different countries are, okay, to different classes. And that affects on the vector of populations, okay? You want to be maybe closer to people who are like you, but after a while you compete and so forth. So there's some sort of competitive mechanism happening there. You have link migration costs because you get congestion, Okay, you see the different photos and so on. And also path costs, which consist of the cost on the different links for the various classes of users. So we have conservation of flow equations. Okay. Paths, we have costs on paths related to the costs on links. We define a feasible set, and it's very important for us to figure out what are the equilibrium conditions. When are you going to have migration stopping? Here we don't have chain migration. Okay, so you think of your migrant, you're trying to find a place that gives you higher utility than relative to where you are. But you also have to include the cost associated with migration. So the migration equilibrium conditions say that you will have a positive flow on a path of a class if, say, the utility of the destination node, okay, is equal to the utility plus the cost. So essentially, the gain in utility covers the cost, okay? But you might not have enough population at the particular origin node to totally clear the market, so we need these Lagrange multipliers. So, and these could be quite large-scale problems. So we formulate the equilibrium conditions as a finite dimensional variation equality in path flows and also the population distribution. And existence of a solution obviously follows because we have a fixed population. Okay, it might be very large and so forth in different countries associated with the refugees, but still. So here we also do alternative formulations, and it's fun to do alternative formulations because they might suggest different algorithmic schemes. You might have an algorithm in link flows or an algorithm in path flows and so on. So here we don't have regulations yet. Now what about regulations? Okay, many of the countries, say we have capital H countries, impose an upper bound. Okay, on, say, the flows coming from, particular origin nodes that they want to identify and destination nodes in their country, and also classes. Sometimes they might restrict low-skilled workers, but at the same time, many countries have shortages of farm workers. And now they're trying, even in the US, to get easier visas, because we really need farm workers to pick the produce. It could be upper bounds, lower skilled, it could be a combination, and so on. And this constraint, or set of constraints, is sufficiently general to handle many different kinds of scenarios that are out there. Okay? But notice here, we don't have coalitions yet. That's a paper that we're working on. So here, what happens, the structure of the variation equality is the same, but you have a different feasible set. And obviously, that's bounded and so on, so you also have an existence of a solution in terms of path flows and population distribution. So let me give you like a numerical, simple examples, okay? Say we have 2 origin nodes and 2 destination nodes. Links 1 and 2 represent that there is no migration. They're essentially staying in the country. Node 1, country 1, is attractive, so there are 2 different routes that those from node 2 can go. Typically, those from node 1 would not migrate to node 2. Okay, so here we define the path flows. We have different utility functions, different initial population distributions. If you stay within the country, it's 0 costs. And we can have even nonlinear functions, asymmetric functions, and so on. And we see that country 1 is attractive, and we have flows going 25 and 100 to country 1. And what happens, you don't have positive values of the Lagrange multipliers. The equilibrium conditions hold. You see, you have 425 plus 350 equals 775. Okay, so it makes sense. And you can see who wins and who gains. Typically, the migrants gain, okay, in terms of utility. The countries where the refugees are leaving can also gain, okay? But since you have competition at destination nodes, sometimes the utility there can go down. Okay, so that's something important to know and to show it, quantitatively. So here we have a more restrictive bound. You see that on path 3, there's 0 flow, okay, because it's too expensive. And also the optimal Lagrange multiplier now associated with the regulation constraint is positive. Okay, So what I've essentially said here, okay? So now we are inspired refugee crisis from the US, okay? And it's major. We have United States locations and locations in Mexico, okay? We have different kinds of routes. And here we have initial population distributions, utility functions, which are decreasing in terms of population. And obviously utility functions associated with living in the US have higher utility fixed values, okay, than those associated with different locations in Mexico. And we can see we handle, congestion to the fourth power, asymmetric costs, and so on. So we're not limited by that. And we have various paths. And this is something interesting, okay? There have been various hypotheses that financial networks behave like congested urban transportation networks, also that electric power generation distribution networks behave like congested urban transportation networks. So here we actually transform the migration problem in this paper into a super network. Okay? And the super network is isomorphic to a fixed demand traffic network equilibrium problem with as many OD pairs as there are origin nodes. And we can use transportation algorithms, which are quite highly developed to apply to this problem. And that's what we do, okay? We have different problems, okay? Different flows, different population distributions, and also the utilities, okay, and that's important. And we see the migration flows. An example is 2 to 4. What we do is we impose bounds, okay? Say on the first route, we have a capacity going from Mexico from node 1. On the second path, going from node 5, we also have a capacity, and then we completely block migration, okay, along those different routes. And we see what happens. So, for example, you see the decrease in utilities because the migrants are kind of unhappy, okay? And other places also how things change. And we have the various costs, the populations, and so on. So under regulations, utility of those subject to regulations, okay, is reduced. And also, we have some work on capacitated human migration networks and system optimization in a recent book that we co-edited with Panos Pardalos and other colleagues on dynamics of disasters. And we're organizing another conference on this theme in Athens, Greece in the summer. What about labor, okay? Yes, there are some layoffs now in the US in the high-tech sector, which is really interesting. On the other hand, there are quite a few economic sectors that are short of labor. Okay, so how can we invest in order to attract international labor? Okay, so this is a paper that I published in Operations Research Perspectives, and that's a journal that has all the papers are available for free online. So, oops, apologies. Okay, so in the COVID pandemic, we've seen major supply chain disruptions. Okay, and a lot of disruptions were because, farmers couldn't get their meat processed. Farmers couldn't get their produce picked. There were clearly shortages, even in the healthcare sector. Right? Nurses in the US were sometimes traveling thousands of miles to assist in different hospitals in the US. Okay? So this is something that we saw, and many were falling ill, a lot were not productive, and so on. So we became very active in this area, and that was an international issue. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what happened in Argentina, but I know Germany was short of workers, England was short of workers, and so on. So even in our area, we had shortages of blueberry workers and produce. And migrant labor is something that is very, very important, something the United Nations also cares about, and it's in one of their sustainable development goals. And there are a lot of issues here. We haven't really addressed trafficking, human trafficking, but in a way it's related because a lot of times the migrant workers aren't being paid what the domestic workers are being paid. So that's something that we wanted to capture in our model. Okay, so there are several papers that we published, and I'll show you a new book coming out next month on labor and supply chain networks. How do you incorporate labor into supply chains? How do you model the productivity? How do you include the wages? What should they be paid, and so on? That's become a complete obsession of mine. So we found out some really interesting results that, firms and supply chain networks can actually have higher profits if they pay workers wages that they deserve. They'll be more productive and so on, okay? And we can show you by how much. So here we're going to have a supply chain network optimization problem. So it's going to be a single firm. It's not going to be a game theory firm. And it has its own manufacturing sites, its own distribution centers, and serves multiple different demand markets. But associated with each of the supply chain network activities is going to be a bound on domestic labor. Okay, so you're going to have shortages perhaps of domestic labor. So you're trying to figure out how much migrant labor should you accept, into your country and so on for the firm. And migrants are responsive to the wages that they get paid, okay, which, they've shown that empirically. So we should be paying international migrant workers the same wages that we pay domestic workers, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So in the model, we allow for different kinds of wages, say to be paid to domestic workers, then are being paid to the international migrant laborers, okay? Also, there are sometimes brokers involved in getting the migrant labor to different countries. Think of what happens in Asia. It even happens in the US. I can tell you, incredible stories. So sometimes they trick the migrant workers and they say, we will pay you a certain wage, but they don't. Okay, so we were interested in studying, how that would affect, okay? And that's important to know because governments should institute policies then. It shouldn't be doing that. Again, we have the framework as a theory of variational inequalities, but it's actually a nonlinear programming problem. And we're inspired by a high-value agricultural product, actually probably the most expensive food that you can eat. Does anyone know what that is? I'll show you in a minute, okay? And England is actually working on it. So this is the firm's supply chain network. And associated with each of the links is going to be a certain volume of the product that the firm is going to produce, right? Have transported, stored, and distributed to multiple points of demand. And also a certain volume of labor that is available. Okay, domestic versus international migration labor. So you see we have different wages that we pay, WA1, WA2, and then W tilde AJ, workers from different countries, okay? And we have link productivity. We have also the balance and a budget in terms of financing to attract the international migrant labor. So we're interested in figuring out how many hours of domestic labor, LA1 on all the links, how much international migrant labor on the various links, how much we should invest in attracting migrants VHA from country J. And we also have a lot of Lagrange multipliers. We love Lagrange multipliers because they really provide you a lot of economic information. We have conservation of flow equations. It is a network problem. And here, notice, we assume that labor, whether domestic or international migrant labor, has the same productivity, okay? We haven't extended the model yet, okay? So how much you can produce, okay, or have transported, stored on a certain link A, FA, is equal to the productivity factor, alpha A, okay, times the labor available. Okay, of either domestic labor, or international migrant labor. And what has happened also in the pandemic is that a lot of workers, their productivity has suffered. They've gotten ill, some have had to work more hours. So, you can model that too. And we have an investment function, okay, depending how much you invest, the different countries to get labor. okay, migrant labor, okay, on the various links, and a budget constraint. So this is the objective function. We're maximizing revenue, okay, how much they stand to gain, minus all the link costs associated with economic activities, minus the investments, and also the wages that what they would pay out, okay, to the different kinds of workers. So we do some machinery, and we can actually express the model in terms of path flows and the investments exclusively, and that works really nicely, subject to the various constraints. And we have nonlinear constraints, too, in terms of the investment functions. Under certain assumptions, we can formulate the model as a variational equality problem, see, minus the partial derivative of the utility functions with respect to the path flows and also the various investments. Okay, and this is another kind of formulation, okay, with Lagrange multipliers. Now, the algorithm that we have, the other model we solved using dynamical systems, an Euler method. Here we use a modified projection method, which allows for really nice closed form expressions at each iteration. So I like that. Students like to implement it in terms of path flows and investments. So did you know that truffles are probably the most expensive food on the planet? Okay, thousands of dollars per pound. And you know, who here, well, we have at least, I know, one colleague from the United Kingdom, right? It's been pummeled with Brexit and so forth, not only COVID, but also Brexit. And UK has decided to invest in growing of truffles, okay, which is interesting, something, you know, you think it's, you know, in Italy and so on. So look at the price, fall of 2021, $4,500 per pound. I think that's like, wow, okay. No wonder it makes sense, you know, to invest in this, provided you can grow it and so. And there were so many shortages of vegetable pickers in the UK that they were willing to pay migrant workers up to 30 pounds an hour to work. So we have this kind of network topology, 2 different production sites for truffles, a single distribution center, and say 3 different points of demand. We have different transportation and production cost functions, demand price functions, which we parameterize based on data that we get. Also, the investment function in terms of attracting the international migrant labor and various parameters for that. And in the first example, the international migrant laborers are paid the same amount as the domestic laborers for all the way, and they're told the truth, okay? So, and we have bounds on the first production site of only 100, of domestic labor, a budget of 1,000. And then in example 2, okay, we're going to be paying, say, on the production site, okay, WP1, lower, okay, for the international migrants, but it'll be honest, okay, and so on. And then finally, we're going to be untruthful, okay, trying to attract the laborers, but not pay them what they should be paid and what they're. And what we find is that, okay, cheating can really pay, okay, which makes sense, and it shows you by how much. So without government oversight, that's really, really bad. So I'm the kind, I believe in always reporting all the input data and the output data for scientific transparency. So you see the computations, you see the investments. And here what we do is we increase the demand price intercepts, okay? They're double, triple, and so on. So say if you do marketing and you see the increase in prices. And here, for example, in these examples, you know, that we have, we see that domestic labor, because, you know, the prices, the wages goes down here, and then there's almost like a stationary point in equilibrium that's being achieved too. So in the final series, we explore impacts of being untruthful. Okay, and here we see an increase in the hiring of international migrant workers. They're all attracted to the work, but it's under false pretenses. Okay, so that really needs to be stopped. Okay, but still, having a sufficient budget is really important. Productivity is also really important, and as we know, once you have a nice model, you have a good code, you can do all sorts of what-if simulations and scenarios. So these are some other papers that I published, and also resilience of supply chain networks to labor disruptions. I think that's really important because in the US, we're also facing potential strikes of port workers on the West Coast in California. So now many carriers are actually going through the Panama Canal and going to the New York ports, Savannah, and other ports. So it's totally changing. And again, you see the routing being changed. Okay, so what we show is, you really need a holistic approach to supply chains, and I'm seeing, more papers like that at this conference, so I really, really like that. We also need to include labor, because there are lots of features, and that should be, integrated into supply chain modeling and analysis. Also, what we've shown is not having wage ceilings can result in higher profits. Taking care of workers is extremely important, and making sure that they get paid what they deserve to be paid. So this is the book, should be available next month in summary and conclusion. So I've highlighted some of our recent work, okay, it has to do with human migration, with labor and supply chains and shortages, including people in network systems, I think is critical. Also, I'm so grateful for this community, for the work that you're doing. We don't work on the easy problems, okay? We work on the challenging problems. But I also think, we're good at collaborating. If you're stuck on something, reach out. You might need an entirely new methodology, okay? Someone might have totally different skills. So, and it's really enjoyable. When you work with other people, you get your paper accepted, you can celebrate together, and I think that's wonderful. So I think together we can continue to accomplish what needs to be done in these challenging and yet fascinating times. And we'll be posting this lecture on the Virtual Center for Super Networks. We have a lot of material there, reprints, preprints, lecture notes, videos, and so on. And it's almost like the United Nations. We have representatives from I don't know how many countries. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
So we thank Professor Nagurney for this very nice presentation on very relevant topics. And now we have some time for questions.
Thank you so much for your very relevant work on migration. I just had a follow-up question. One, are these migrants, what is your experience after working so many years? How do they, because utilities we were talking about, to what extent can they actually rationally calculate utilities around their future outcomes? And does this actually have some impact on the modeling work we should do in the future? And also, are there differences between across-region migration and within the region migration into?
Yeah, excellent questions. Whoops, thank you. This is means it to fly over. Or maybe this one work? Does this one work? Yeah? Yeah, okay. There's also being a lot of work done, especially in the pandemic, because there have been a lot of displaced people within countries. including, interestingly, in India. Okay, so I'm seeing, but still, I think much more needs to be done, okay? Obviously, some of our OR colleagues have been working on resettlement and so forth, and places where to resettle, how to resettle, you know, what countries are responsible, and processing of asylum seekers and refugees, and then moving them further, okay? We've been, you know, really working on how to try and make these migratory flows better from a societal perspective and also from their perspective. This way, you know, the system optimization versus user optimization. And you have beautiful formulae for, in terms of subsidies that essentially tells governments, you know, you should be maybe spending more money on people, even the US, in different countries like Venezuela, El Salvador, and places like that, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, the thing is, I didn't have time for that. I really believe in us writing op-eds, letters to the editor. Okay, typically when I have a couple of papers, I will write an article in the conversation, and our work on blood supply chains in the US actually influenced national policy because of an article I wrote. And 22 attorneys general cited it on the first page, okay, in a memo to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, and it worked. Okay, and it's one of the most highly downloaded papers. Some of those articles that I write, even on containers and supply chains and shortages of containers, one article, which was reposted in the news media, okay, all over the place, had about 340,000 reads within days. How many of our papers are read by 340,000? Maybe people, kind of. So I really believe that we should be doing that and something, and I work a lot with legislators, and I'm, you know, on different task forces. Some of them I have to be secret about, I can't even talk about, but you get things done, which is really gratifying. That's what you want to do, is really help people, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very nice talk.
Thank you.
You know, in the 80s, '82, I arrived in Montreal to work in microflora. And I studied 6 Lyons, and he presented the Stumpacker works. For some years, I was with a professor at Montreal. I could work this kind of thing, but I did not study new algorithms and convergence with algorithms. I did not read or study about evolution of this kind of algorithms. It's very good now, new, convergence and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
Just kind of.
Yeah, there's so much that can be done here still, but it's important to get it out because, you know, there are economists working in this area, sociologists working in this area, demographers working, you know, operations researchers, network scientists, and so on. So, but, you know, I think we've done a lot, including, you know, routes, and they're complex, because that's the reality. It's not just a single link, you know, in terms of their choices, and they do look at different possible choices, and some are horrendous, like going through Venezuela, I mean, through the muds, anyway. But there's that drive to find places that are better for their family members or for themselves, you know.
Okay. So one final question. No?
Buena suerte to Messi today.
But we say again, please,
Thank you. Thank you.
before finishing this part,